I'm always impressed to start the year off with this event. It goes without saying, I travel around the M&T footprint constantly talking to groups and businesses, and this to me is still, and continues to improve, it seems, yearly, the premier event of its type in upstate New York. And I have to, again, thank Rob and his staff and all of you for being engaged to be here today. It's so critical that we work together when it comes to charting our path forward in terms of understanding the challenges we face, planning and working together to overcome them. I think it starts here and continues throughout the year with the sense that we're in this together. And certainly we do have to roll up our sleeves and do a lot of work here in central New York. There's no sense getting around the fact that we have to overcome some of the challenges that have kept our economy somewhat lagging relative to other areas of the country, relative to our peers in other parts of upstate New York. But the first step to any progress is always to get commitment to change. And this room, again, to me, is the symbol of that in central New York. And I, again, applaud all of you for being here. I hope I can leave you with a few thoughts in terms of what it is that we're going to be facing this year from a macro perspective, and also what we can focus on and the challenges we have here in central New York. I do have a bit of more positive news than I've had the last couple of years when it comes to looking at the CenterState region economy. We have to keep that going, though, and that is going to, again, be a part of working together, having a sense of urgency, and getting it done. Let's get started, though. There's no shortage of questions around where are we in the economy right now. We've seen over the last month plus now just endless amounts of stories, pro, con, up, down, sideways, you name it, in terms of where we're headed. It's good that we're focused on the economy, but it's also important to have a set of frameworks in order to look at where we are so we don't sort of make bad decisions based on hearsay, make bad decisions based on emotional responses as opposed to good, solid business type decisions. We are still, to all degrees that we can look at, in a point where we're not getting towards the end of this economic cycle. There are a couple of factors that are in the latter stages of that process, but by and large, the economy still looks very solid. We're going to look at some of those trends, and that is what I want to start out with today, that we are not heading over a precipice anytime soon. We have to be vigilant about looking at the lay of the land, but at the same time, don't talk ourselves into backsliding or curtailing decisions that for no good reason. Let's have some good common economic sense on this. We had a very good labor report last week that I think sort of let some of the air out of that growing bubble of pessimism, and for good reason. We've had a very great consistency in terms of the labor demand, the labor supply, the labor of getting this country moving forward in terms of working, getting paychecks, having that disposable income, and then deploying it into our economy. You can just see how strongly that trend line has been over the last 8+ years. You can see again that the help wanted signs are still out there, that employers are looking to bring on new employees. And in your forecast at your tables today from the CenterState survey, labor demand, labor intentions are virtually on every page of that document. Employers are still looking to bring on those employees. That translates into disposable spending power. Those paychecks will be spent. That's the nature of the U.S. economy. And to give you a sense of that, personal consumption spending has been inordinately solid, very strong. And that, to me, is the floor for looking ahead to 2019. Consumer spending is the biggest part of the U.S. economy. 70% roughly, of total GDP. There are other elements that come into play, like exporting, capital spending, government spending, et cetera, but they are much smaller pieces than that consumer story. And the solid labor growth, the solid labor increase in terms of income is supporting that type of activity to the tune of, again, we probably had our best holiday shopping season in a number of years, and looking forward to those December numbers when they come in a few weeks. Looking at some of the leading type indicators, the Conference Board leading indicator series certainly is still looking at positive growth heading into the first half of this year and beyond. We had a bit of a wobble in the November reading. I wouldn't be surprised if our December reading is a bit of a wobble, because one of the factors that goes into the components of this index is the financial markets. So December's hiccup, if you will probably put a little bit of pressure on that leading indicator. But stepping back from it and looking at a long-term view like we see here, we don't see that imminent demise of the U.S. recovery anytime soon. We still see solid growth heading into the year, and that's, again, something that we need to all focus on rather than sort of the angst or emotional side of what we've seen. So the forecast right now is still for 2019 to be a solid year. Whether this number is 2.66% growth, which was the consensus last month, or tomorrow when the new number is released, it moves to 2.5, 2.4, it's not setting us back to the point where we're hitting the reset button. These are the type of growth stories that we've navigated, the type of growth that will be prosperous for many Americans, many households, many CenterState households heading into the coming year. So let's keep focused on what is happening in the economy and the underpinnings, the good bones that this recovery and expansion has been built on. Yes, be vigilant to watch for signs, and there are things we're going to have to watch. There are some wild cards, and so we'll take a look at that real quick before we move on to the local forecast. This is the number one impediment to global growth, U.S. growth, regional growth that I see heading into the year. Trade has been an important part of why our economic growth in the past year plus in the nation has moved into that next year of around 2.93% type GDP growth. It's the secret sauce that you layer on top of that consumer spending that has been critical to engaging faster growth. And it's unfortunate, however, that the uncertainty around trade policy seems to be having a chilling effect on global growth, particularly outside the United States, where so much of economic structures are built on international trade. The global economy has become much more trade dependent over the last several decades. About 30% of global growth is really predicated on international trade. And that's up more than double over the last 4 decades. And we start to rattle the cage a bit of international trade confidence, international trade certainty. It's not unreasonable that we start to see slower growth in our partners around the globe, and that ripples back to our shores in terms of causing some downward pressure a bit on our growth. So to the extent that we are not going to probably see 3% growth, more than that 2.5% growth, I look at this as being the biggest impediment right now. What we really need to have in the country is some certainty around this. It's good to see that we had some progress apparently yesterday with the U.S. talks with China. We need more of that. We need to get this solved and out of the way so our economy can grow much more like we saw in 2018. Another headwind and wild card for the coming year, and we saw this again on many of the pages of the CenterState forecast, is labor availability. The call-out box on this slide is fascinating to me, that the last time the country was experiencing unemployment like this was in 1969, and since that time, only two-thirds, or only about a third of Americans were alive that were still in that time frame. We're seeing things that we have not had to navigate with in a long, long time as businesses. It's going to put pressure on finding that next new employee, certainly in terms of labor supply, labor availability. We still have a bit more room to grow. And it was encouraging again last Friday to see that one of the reasons why the national unemployment rate went from 3.7 to 3.9 was because new entrants are coming into the labor pool. That's what we need to have nationally. It's what we need to have regionally. We'll talk about that when we get to the CenterState set of information. But certainly this is going to be something that will hover over 2019 going forward with the labor demand still being strong. And finally, the last wild card I want to talk about before we move on, interest rates. Interest rate policy is fascinating. As a banker, we live and breathe it every day, but not everyone is as closest to it as we are. Chairman Powell and the Fed colleagues really haven't changed their outlook much. They haven't changed a lot, but so it was interesting to watch the market gyrations around some of the things that were apparently attributable to the Fed last month in terms of moving forward with rate increases. I don't think much has changed in terms of Fed policy. The Fed is still looking to normalize rates, move rates at the short end up probably a little higher in 2019. The plan right now is for 2 more rate increases. Whether we see those increases will depend on how the economy performs in the first half of the year. My bet is that the Fed probably will pause a bit to see how that data come in. But ultimately, the bottom line here is, again, interest rates shouldn't be something that we should be afraid of. They continue to be advantageous relative to past history. This is something that we can navigate. The fact that longer-term rates are likely to stay low should continue to help us in terms of things like home mortgages, et cetera, which are key to the economy. So going forward, we're still looking at interest rates being very positive in terms of continuing this expansion. Of course, at this point, we really want to know, what does it mean to us? You know, I can stand up here all day and talk about the macroeconomy, but I know the room itself really wants to know, what do we need to know on the ground level moving forward? So let's take a look at how we are seeing the CenterState economy. To kick off, a lot of what we have talked about the last several years continue to play out in 2018 with a bit of good news as well, however. Yes, the economy here continues to lag the U.S. in terms of total output, but we saw a bit of a bending of the curve in 2018 in our estimates in terms of growth patterns. It was the best year that we've seen locally since 2012, moving the needle by about 1.5% forward, as opposed to about a 0.5% or so the year before. That gives me a sense that we are starting to make the types of changes that we need to see in our economy. Are we satisfied with that number? Of course not. We have to continue to push. But things look a little better, and continuing that progress, continuing those efforts are going to be critical for 2019. In terms of why we continue to lag, I think it's important to look at a couple of structural factors. If you break the economy down into its base components, you have goods producing and service providing being the biggest parts of any economy. Looking at the goods producing is fascinating to me. Like all upstate regions, the CenterState region has seen a contraction in its manufacturing and goods producing capacity. We are down from where we were a decade ago. But looking at our peers up and down the thruway, Buffalo, Rochester, Albany, they've actually experienced much more downward pressure collectively than this region. The thing that has kept us from enjoying some of the success and renaissance that those areas are seeing, though, is the other side of the ledger here, the service providing side. where we are not creating enough opportunity in those service-producing type industries, which make up about 2/3 of the economy, that we are seeing in the other upstate metros, which have been doing a very good job of competing and moving in lockstep to some degree with the rest of the country, even given the challenges of being part of the upstate world where our population growth is not the same as what we see elsewhere. This is the area that we really need to focus on in moving CenterState region forward. We have to broaden the base. We have to make sure that we're capturing some of these higher growth type service opportunities, and that includes things like professional business services, tourism, a host of things beyond the simple fact that we provide services. Now, one area that we do a great job, and as we heard from Leslie, Central New York is a real excellent job in terms of its education, healthcare, infrastructure. We are very much focused on that in the region. We do it better in terms of a size of our economy, in terms of the wages that employees take relative to the total for the region, and in terms of the total growth in those wages. The eds and med sector has been leading the way. What we need to see, however, is again that broadening of the base, where we're not doing as strongly in terms of the broader panoply of service industries. This is where we really need to encourage entrepreneurialism and risk-taking and infrastructure improvements that will allow entrepreneurs to create new industries, to create new businesses, to be able to, again, go in directions we traditionally have not done in this community, and that is going to be how we succeed going forward. We can't continue to do a lot of what we've done in the past. We have to find new ways forward, and these are the pathways to get there, because this is where the rest of the country is moving. Let's finish up with some look at labor. There's good news that we are seeing it in terms of unemployment. Certainly good news in terms of the regional unemployment rate at 3.8%. We hit an all-time low in the most recent numbers, folks, and that's amazing to me that we are seeing that kind of steady demand for employees, steady onboarding of employees, driving that number to not that far distant from the U.S. number. And in fact, if we can continue into December with this rate, we'll be below the U.S. number. Fascinating, again, in a region that has had some challenges economically in terms of quite a few forward progress penalties, if you will, against us. We are looking at this in terms of both positive and negative, however. Positive in terms of the spending power it connotes, in terms of individuals taking home paychecks, having that disposable spending power. A growing sense, however, though, that we're going to need more supply of labor going forward in order to fulfill the needs of employers. We're going to be able to look at that in a moment, but certainly that is the challenge as we look ahead. The challenge that we faced up to this point, though, is unfortunately something of a demographic issue. We are seeing older workers leaving the workforce, which puts pressure, again, on that unemployment number. We need to solve this equation to some degree. And if it's not just grow the labor force to find those employees, it definitely has a lot to do with policies around redeploying individuals, giving them the skills that are needed, the training, the education, all the things that we need to have a viable workforce going forward. We aren't going to be able to fight the demographic trend. There's certainly a sense that aging baby boomers will continue to probably leave the playing field. But how can we get more people engaged, whether that's younger people staying here, taking advantage of opportunities, hopefully bringing in more people in terms of engaging them in our workforce. And here, with our next slide, is where I'm really encouraged. We started to see beginning in probably the first quarter of 2018, a swinging around of that labor supply downturn, starting to see an upturn, in fact, in the latter stages of 2018 in terms of the size of our workforce. And we have not seen that in quite some time. That's very, very encouraging. It's very encouraging as well to see the number of residents of the CenterState region being employed, moving in such a strongly positive direction. I think we are in a transitionary phase where we're starting to see the fruits of our efforts around moving things around and making the decisions we need to make start to pay off. And this is, again, what we need to nurture and really push forward into the 2019 period because the progress appears to be finally making itself evident. So our last slide, again, the challenge for our community going forward has a lot to do with embracing change, embracing transformation, bringing all of us together in terms of solving the economic challenges that we face. We look at labor force issues locally as one area that is critically important. If you break down educational attainment by the two charts you see here, certainly there's a dichotomy. Those folks with an associate's degree or above have continued to find employment opportunities. Those with less educational attainment are leaving the playing field. How can we stem that outflow? How can we have people have the opportunity to continue to participate in our economy? How can we challenge ourselves to make sure that we're supporting the type of environment that allows that to happen? I don't think there's a better organization to sort of lead that charge than CenterState. And all of you and your commitment to this organization are, again, the spear carriers in terms of helping to make this change happen. I'm encouraged that we're starting to see the progress that we've talked about for the last several years translate into some of the economic numbers. Again, what we need to do, keep it going, stay focused, and have a sense of urgency that we can't let this sort of linger and take years to solve. We need to be on this daily. And with that, I'm going to, again, wish you all the best for 2019 heading forward. I'm encouraged. I hope you are as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our illustrious speaker, Rob, and he will really bang the drum, I think, on many of these same thoughts. Thank you very much, and good luck with 2019.